Hi there, welcome everyone. My name is Steph McDougall. I'm the project manager for the Houston Heights Historic District Design Guidelines project. I'm so pleased that you're here tonight participating in what is, I think, the 10th community meeting for the Houston Heights Historic Districts, and this will be the 26th time that I have met with community groups in one form or another in the past 2 years. We're coming up on October 1st, being the 2-year anniversary of my participation in this project. So I want to thank everyone who's been with us along the way, and for those of you who are just joining us, welcome. Also to those folks who are watching this on video, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you as well. Just so I know, is there anyone here who has not been to one of the design guidelines meetings yet? Okay, great. A couple people. Well, we're going to go over some of what you've missed in the past 24 months on this project. For those of you who are just coming in, before you leave, I need you to sign in at the table outside so we know who was here. As it's a public meeting, we do have to keep track. Okay, so tonight we're basically going to talk about where we've been, how we got here, where we are now, and what's next. And we began this project with a directive from City Council as part of the Historic Preservation Ordinance that was amended in 2015 to create design guidelines for the 3 Houston Heights historic districts, East, West, and South. Now, during the process of locating a consultant to do that work, we were able to also expand that scope of work to include the Freeland, Norhill, and Woodland Heights historic districts. Hi, come on in. And to also update the design guidelines for Old 6th Ward. And in our next phase, we'll be creating design guidelines for Glenbrook Valley and the Main Street Market Square historic districts. Okay, so why are we having design guidelines, and what in the heck are they? Design guidelines are a way for us to provide information about how the more broad language in the Historic Preservation Ordinance applies to specific historic districts. We have about 22 historic districts in Houston, and they are all very different. So you have commercial buildings in Main Street Market Square, little ranch homes down in Glenbrook Valley, some of the city's oldest Victorian houses in the Old 6th Ward Protected Historic District, and then, of course, a variety of early turn of the century and early 20th century buildings in places like Houston Heights and the historic districts around that. So design guidelines, because it provides more information about how the ordinance is likely to be interpreted for a specific historic district, is designed to make the certificate of appropriateness application process easier, more clear, and predictable. And we're designing these guidelines in response to requests from property owners and members of the builder and designer community, including architects and contractors, who wanted to know going into a project what would be most likely to be approved. So this is in response to requests. So here's where we are so far. We have done a lot of community engagement, and we are down now to the point where we had a draft of the design guidelines that was released in June. We took comments on that, made revisions as a result, and released a second draft in August, and have been taking comments on that. The public comment period for that second draft is going to close on October 6th, so in a week. If you have any other comments or questions that you want to send me, now's the time. And then after that, it's going to go through the approval process. That includes going to the Historic Commission, and we're going to present that in an informational way to the Historic Commission in October, so that if they have any additional questions for us, we can go ahead and get that information for them before they have to vote whether or not they want to recommend the design guidelines to council for approval. They'll do that voting in November, and then after that, it's going to go first as a presentation to the Quality of Life Committee of the City Council, and then to City Council itself for a vote to approve, or whatever they want to do with it. So what we have control over in the Historic Preservation Office is the Historic Commission agenda. So I can tell you that we're going to have the October presentation and the November meeting vote, but after that we don't control the commission or the agendas for the Quality of Life Committee or City Council. So we know we won't take anything to Quality of Life Committee until January at least, and when we get on that agenda, we'll be publicizing that on our website and through CitizensNet and through the leader and those various places so that you all know and can participate in those public hearings. So tonight I'm really going to talk mostly about the comments we got on the June draft, what we did as a result of those, and then the comments we've received so far on the August draft. So we heard from 61 individuals and 2 organizations in June and July, and about a third of them are not property owners in the Houston Heights historic districts. So we value everyone's comments and participation. We did get very helpful comments from a number of architects. We heard from a lot of real estate agents, but of course the greatest weight is always given to property owners. And you can see that we got pretty much the highest response from the Houston Heights East folks. That's not really surprising. It's the biggest of the districts. Typically, that's who's been participating the most in the project. But we did hear from the other 2 districts as well, West and South. Come on in, you can sit anywhere. It's fine. Just a reminder for those of you who are still coming in, before you leave, I need to ask you to sign in at the table out front if you have not already done that, so that we can get a good count of everyone who's here, because we need that information for public records. Okay, so what kind of comments did we get on the June draft? Well, it was kind of like, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears a little bit. We had, some people who said they were really mad because the guidelines were too lenient. And then we had other people who said, I am completely opposed and I don't like any of it. And we also had a few people who said, yeah, I think they're okay. And we had comments and questions as well. The majority of the folks who responded said, I like the guidelines, but I have issues with some of the measurable standards, in particular the floor area ratio and lot coverage numbers. So we also had comments about the C of A process and a lot of questions about how is this going to affect my project and when will the design guidelines go into effect. So I've told you about our approval schedule to the best of my ability, and I've also worked out what I think is going to be a good implementation, which is I'm going to recommend that after council approves the design guidelines, assuming that that happens, that the effective date of those is delayed for 60 days. And the point of that is really so that no applicant is caught in the middle where they've submitted or they're about to submit an application and that didn't follow the design guidelines requirements, but then all of a sudden the design guidelines go into effect and then they have to scramble. So we're trying to avoid getting anyone caught in that kind of situation. So we also got some suggestions, lots of suggestions from some people. I have about 150 pages of email that we got from 60 people basically. We had a lot of people who, I had a few folks who provided dozens of email suggestions, some in separate emails. We had a lot of people who really took the time to think about this and provide excellent, excellent comments, which I very much appreciate. You guys have all been great to work with throughout this process, and I just really appreciate how much everybody really took the time to think carefully about the design guidelines and the content and the numbers, and work through scenarios and provide examples and all of that stuff. That has really been awesome. We had people making suggestions for changes to the sum of the measurable standards, and we'll get to that in a minute. We also had people who have made suggestions for a variety of ways that we could deal with context area. Now that is a concept that tells you what your project would be compared to in order to determine compatibility. And in the Historic Preservation Ordinance, that's defined as the block face that your project is on and the opposing block face. In some cases, because you might have a situation where maybe your property is one of the only contributing properties on your block face, and then across the street from you, it's not even in the historic district, the Historic Preservation Ordinance provides that the commission can decide if they need to expand the context area for various reasons to make sure that they can help you figure out what that compatibility area should be so that you're able to be compared to other contributing buildings. And then the other thing I got a lot of comments on and suggestions were how to handle differentiation between original buildings and additions. And so what you'll see in the August draft is that we've included a whole bunch of options for how to do that, and it's not directing anyone to do that in a certain way. It's saying, here are options that you can consider in order to accomplish that goal, and what is appropriate for your house, may be different from project to project, but it gives you some alternatives to consider as you're looking at your own project. We're going to do questions and answers at the end, and I honestly do not have a lot more stuff to go over, so I want to wait and do all the questions together. Okay. So if you didn't pick it up, sir, I'm going to get to all the questions at the end, please. Oh, Chris, can you help us out there? Thank you. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, so out at the front table, there is this document which describes, in summary, the changes that we made to the draft in between the June and the August version. And this has been online since August, but if you didn't have a chance to pick it up, I brought a whole bunch of copies for you, and we're going to talk about that now, because I want you to see that we listened to what you had to say. So so that when you all said, we think this is a problem, or we'd like to make this suggestion, we listened and we took that seriously, and we've made clarifications and adjustments to try to address the questions and concerns that people had in a way that still met the spirit of the Historic Preservation Ordinance and the guidelines. So first of all, I told you back in I think, March, when we met to talk about strategy, that I would be doing a usability evaluation on the design guidelines, and I did. So that means that we take the document and we test it using fake C of A cases to see if people can use the document to figure out whether or not a project would be approved or not. what we found was that people had a hard time finding information easily in the document, and so we've reorganized it so that some of the information is in different places, and hopefully so that it's easier to find what you need and it's very clear. For example, the measurable standards are all in one place. The ordinance information is right up front and it's all in one place. And we try to divide other things out so that all the information on windows is all in one place to the extent that was possible. So hopefully the organization of the design guidelines document will be easier to use as a result. And I want to thank the people who helped and participated in that process. So I know all of you are probably most interested in the measurable standards. So, and that's really what we did the most work on. We actually sat down and worked through a bunch of different scenarios and looked at how would this work for real projects. And so one of the things that we came up with that I think is really important that I'm sure you'll appreciate is that when you have a situation where your context area is not, doesn't really fit the numbers that are published in the design guidelines, we've got a process for how you can bring that information to the commission and ask them to use different numbers for your project. So you have to gather some data and you have to present that, and it's got to be documented. But if you were in an area where all of the contributing houses were much bigger than the rest of your neighborhood, for example, you could bring that forth and ask the commission to look at your project differently than what the design guidelines say. And so we think that that's going to provide the flexibility that's needed for those situations where it's just a different situation. And it's not covered under a kind of a one-size-fits-all deal. We've also expanded for both lot coverage and floor area ratio the exemption of square footage that applies to a detached garage and a detached garage apartment. Initially, the consultants were recommending 150 square feet. We said that's not even a one-car garage. We need to bump it up to 250. What we heard from you was that wasn't big enough. Everybody pretty much uniformly said we really have to have a two-car garage size thing in here, and we agree. So that's been bumped up to 400 square feet for both the garage and the garage apartment for a detached garage. We've also added a lot of clarifying language per your suggestions, comments, and questions for what is included and not included in lot coverage and floor area ratio. We had some inconsistencies between the two of those things in terms of accessory buildings and things like that. So what we've tried to do is make the lot coverage and the floor area ratio calculations as consistent as possible with each other. So accessory buildings are excluded whether they're conditioned or not. Lot coverage and floor area ratio both exclude open and screened porches. Now, if you have like a closed-in sunroom that has walls and windows, that's counted. But if you just have, an open or a screened-in porch, it doesn't. And that was not clear in the previous draft. So we've clarified that. The other big issue was attics. That was a question that we didn't have a clear answer on, even from the consultants, so we've clarified that. The FAR calculation will exclude completely existing attics or attics in existing contributing buildings. Now, if an attic is in a non-contributing building, an addition or new construction, it'll be excluded if it doesn't have dormers. So if it doesn't appear to be living space. And the purpose for that was that to allow those contributing buildings to build up and to maximize square footage. For new stuff, however, we wanted to minimize the creation of effective third stories or things that have the appearance of a third story. And I'm sure some of you will have questions on that, and we'll get to those in a second. For front setbacks, we've added instructions for how to calculate the front setback range for your context area, realizing that that was really kind of important information that you would need to have that had been missed in the previous draft. So now we've got instructions for how to do that. On the side setbacks, the original recommendation from the consultants was that the side setbacks should be 5 feet on each side and a cumulative total of 15 feet. And a lot of people didn't like that. So when we looked at the real purpose and intent behind that, it was to try to move some of the tall building mass of two-story buildings and additions away from the property line, because we got a lot of comments and complaints in the run-up to this process from people who said that, my neighbors, build this big house and it looms over my property line and it's really close to my fence and I don't have any sunlight and I don't have any privacy, etc. So the goal was to try to move that in. Well, that only really applies to two-story buildings. So what we've done is kept the 5 feet setback, but have a cumulative 5 feet on each side, or cumulative 10 feet that applies to one-story buildings. So if you have a one-story building, one-story addition, the 5 feet on each side is all you have to meet. If you've got a two-story addition, though, it does have to step in just a little bit more to meet that 15-foot cumulative setback. And that addresses the issue that we had with so many people asking us to address big walls over the back of their backyard. So then we also got a lot of questions about, what if the existing building is already less than 5 feet? So we want to do an addition, but we're already within that 5-foot setback. So what we've decided is that the addition can match the existing building or be 3 feet, whichever is greater. So that takes care of that issue, I think. And also we've clarified that the side setback is measured from the property line to the point of the building that's closest to the property line, and it's the same side setback for the entire side of the building. So whatever the closest point of your building is to the property line, that's where you measure. That's for clarification's sake. We had a lot of questions about, well, what about if my building jogs in or out, and what counts, and what part of it do I measure for this 15-foot cumulative setback and that sort of thing. Okay, so hopefully we've addressed your side setback questions and concerns. We did also hear what you had to say about plate height. Now, plate height is the distance between the floor to the ceiling of any story. So you can have a first floor plate height and a second floor plate height. And previously, the design guidelines had maximum heights for each one of those. So we recognize that if you have an existing building that doesn't match that, that's a problem. So if you have a plate height and you want to have an addition, if you want to put in an addition on, your plate height of your addition can match your existing building, whatever that is. If you have a 12-foot plate height in your queen Anne house, your addition can have that same first floor plate height. Or it can be lower, either one. We have eliminated entirely plate height limits for new one-story buildings, and we increased the plate heights for new construction by a foot, from 9 to 10 feet for the first floor and 8 to 9 feet for the second floor per your comments and suggestions. Along with that, we also said, well, if this is the plate height, then what would the eave height be? You know, how did those numbers work out when you actually look at this? As it turns out, the numbers that we had didn't really match up with the eave heights. And to make them match up, so we've decreased the maximum eave height for one-story buildings from 14 feet at the 5-foot setback to 12 feet, because the numbers we had previously didn't make sense mathematically. You couldn't have a 14-foot plate height at the 5-foot setback with all the other numbers that were in that whole equation. But eave height can increase as side setback increases, and just like before, up to 2 feet more, so that maximum is now 14 feet. The second-story eave height numbers did not change. And finally, we've increased the maximum height for a 2-story garage from 25 feet to 26 feet. Again, looking at the numbers and what makes sense for a real project. So we published that draft in August, and I will apologize. I know there's typographical errors. Some of the fonts are wonky. That is 100% my fault for not catching those. Thank you for the folks who did send us some information and say, hey, we noticed this is a problem. And since then, we got some comments and questions and requests for additional comment time on the revised draft, which is great. We're happy to do that. So we had a 2-month comment period. It started August 7th, ends October 6th, next Friday. So far, I've received 12 comments, half of which are not from people who live in the Houston Heights districts. Most of them are about, when is this going to go into effect? How is this going to affect my project? What about swimming pools? Hey, I think you forgot about basements. I don't like historic preservation. How is the context area going to work in my specific situation, which we've addressed in the design guidelines already? How will differentiation work again, which we've addressed? We also have, once again, had a range of comments about, I think they're way too lenient. I had one lady tell me that she thinks it feels sick to her stomach because the guidelines are too lenient. We have, of course, people who are still in complete opposition and don't think there should be any rules. And some folks who have said, I think the process is working and I'm fine with it. So again, kind of this 3 bears scenario. I told you all when we started this project that it was my goal that everybody would be more happy than unhappy. I know I can't make everybody happy, and I'm not going to make probably anybody completely happy, but I hope that we are creating some kind of effective problem-solving solution here that will move us all forward and make this easier for everybody. So going forward, here are the recommendations that I have so far. Number 1, of course, we're going to edit and fix all the typos. I'm also going to add more photographs. We have been pulling those together so we can put in more good examples. And we'll add clarifying language to the effect that basements will not count in the floor area ratio calculations. So thank you to the person who brought that up. And if we have any other actionable comments or questions or comments or suggestions going forward, then we'll certainly consider into the best of our ability incorporate those as well. So that's how it's going to work. Kind of a short and sweet recap. We are kind of at the end of this process, having gone through 2 years and a lot of meetings and drafts. I'm going to get to all of your questions and answer every single one of them until every person is satisfied that they've gotten to ask questions. So I appreciate you sticking with me while we do that.